today we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of Doctor Who. Doctor Who is the most storied show out there, and over the last 50 years, it's probably had something like 20 million books published under the banner. Now that's impressive. Now, today we are joined by two authors, one of which is very well known, Alastair Reynolds, an accomplished science fiction author in his own right, and of course, author of Harvests of Time. It's very good stuff. I recommend it, and we'll be talking about it later. And then we have Andy Frank of Alien, who's written one of the most definitive guides to the Doctor Who companions that you'll ever read. In fact, I can honestly say that there are things in there even I didn't know, and I know quite a bit about the Doctor Who show, let's face it. Anyway, I'm slightly nervous. I'm probably slightly drunk as well. I apologise, but I'm sure that you'll allow me to introduce both of these people and give them a round of applause. Alastair Reynolds and Andy Frank of Alien. First things first. Who shall I speak to first?
Alastair is the man.
This is about books. This is about fiction. So let's talk about fiction itself first. Now, you're an accomplished author, of course.
Of course, yes.
How long have you been writing?
Truthfully, since I could hold a pen, really. You know when you're in school and they'd say, write a story or tell us what you did on your holidays, I would always use that as a sort of cheap excuse to write a science fiction story. And it really is going back to when I was 5 or 6. I mean, my dad took me to see...
Well, you could write at 5 and 6.
Well, when do they teach you to write? 7 then, yeah.
I mean, I could scribble things down
Nick
on paper, but
But my dad took me to see a double bill of From Russia with Love and Goldfinger. I remember the day that just blew my mind on so many levels. You know, the Aston Martin with the spikes coming out of the wheels and the laser, and I just started writing sort of stories about lasers and cars with weird things in, and I never stopped. So I just kept writing right through my sort of early years and into my teens, and I wrote 2 novels when I was in my teens.
Were they published?
No, they were. As soon as I finished one, I knew it was rubbish. But I started writing another one, and then I think at some point I started trying to find out a little bit about how do you actually get stuff published. Are there such things as magazines where you can send short stories? And that's basically how I did it.
I'm assuming you went down the Interzone route then.
Well, I did, but Interzone is still going. Actually, has been a fairly reliable way of getting science fiction into print in the UK.
Short stories, I think.
Short fiction, yeah. It's 1981, I think they started. So getting on for 35 years or so now. Yeah. And they, I broke into Interzone. It took me about 5 years before they actually bought something of mine. But it was brilliant because I sold them a story. This is 1989. They actually bought the story off me, and then I sold them a second one, and then they sent me a letter and they said, would you like to come to Brian Aldiss's 65th birthday party?
Wow.
Brian Aldiss was like an eminent figure in British science fiction. He's still
very much so, yeah.
So I went to the Groucho Club in London, which is this sort of trendy media hangout with all, and like literally, I mean, everyone was there. It was like Kingsley Amis was there, J.G. Ballard was there. It was incredible. And I think the contacts I made that night effectively were what got me into publishing 10 years later.
That's what set you up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Totally, yeah.
So, I mean, where did you go from there? I mean, is it... Oh. Obviously, yeah. So, oh dear. Yeah. So you've met probably some of your literary heroes at that.
I did, yeah. I also met, I would say, my peer group in terms of the generation of writers who were breaking into science fiction at the same time. I met Stephen Baxter for the first time that night, and of course Steve's just done a Doctor Who book.
I know, it's hell of a coincidence, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just, yes.
But, yeah. But anyway, so as I said, you've met your heroes at this point. What made you just want to go for it? What made you just want to be an author?
I guess it's just a compulsion, really. I mean, people won't believe you, but it was, for me, it's never about the fame and the fortune, if you want. It was just like a desire to write stories, and that's why I still write short science fiction stories now. I mean, I get paid to write novels. And if I was being sensible about it, then the sort of hours I put into writing short fiction are useless, because you just really don't you know.
It's not about making money, though.
I mean,
about writing.
you'd be better off working in a bar,
Yeah,
basically,
probably.
in terms of the hours you put in. And, you know, quite literally, you can spend weeks and weeks on a short story,
But
and
then-
you might get 100 quid for it, you know. So it's sort of, in those terms, it doesn't balance out. But
Would you say it's actually more valuable, though, as a writing exercise than anything else?
it's that, and it's, for me, it's also a way of trying things that I can't do in the scope of a novel. Or also I might think, well, I'm going to try something now, see if I get on with it, and then I might be able to use it novelistically in a year or two.
Almost the writer's equivalent of research and development, then?
Yeah, it's a little, it's
why
a
not?
crack lab for fiction, you know.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. Instant hit, then it's over.
Yeah. But I do genuinely love writing short fiction, and the other thing that's great about it is you get the sort of it's a relatively quick turnaround in terms of getting the reward for it. You know, you can get the stuff into print relatively quickly. I mean, you know, it can be weeks. Yeah. Whereas with novels, it can take a year or two before you get anywhere with a novel, and that can be a bit of a grind at times. The sort of timescales.
So, when was your first big novel? And when presumably you'd had lots of failed attempts or things that didn't quite hit where.
No, it was just blazing success from the word go. Really.
Oh, well, there we are then.
No, it was actually. Well, I didn't have the setbacks that a lot of writers have, and I only realised this later when you actually get into publishing and you talk to writers and they say, oh, you know, I had 500 rejection letters before I got a sale. And how many did you have then? I thought 5, which I thought was bad. You know, I thought 5 was bad enough. And I wrote a novel that the ones I wrote in my teens, I decided they were no good. Even, you know, it never crossed my mind to actually try and market them.
Did you keep them though?
I've still got them. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
When you're dead,
they're handwritten.
Yeah.
You know, they're literally written in biro. You know, but the proper novel, I basically sent it to a publisher, and they bought it. No one rejected it. It took 2 years for them to actually get their act together and actually make me an offer. But I didn't, you know, it wasn't rejected, and that's unusual. And I also did something which you can't do now. It's almost impossible, which was I didn't go through an agent. Because if you read books on how to write, now they say, you know, you can't ever get anywhere with a publisher without first getting an agent. So in a way, they've sort of, getting an agent is now the objective rather than getting a publisher. But I just didn't know better.
So, I mean, obviously that we've had a little bit about how he got into writing there, but for you, what was it for you?
Well, like Alistair, I was writing since I was a wee lad, all those many moons ago. Writing fiction in school, which was kind of okay-ish. But I didn't get my big break until 2003.
What was that for?
Short trip for Gary Russell for Big Finish's Doctor Who collection.
Ah,
You may have heard of Doctor Who.
yeah. Well, in fact, funnily enough, we'll be coming to that in a moment.
Yeah, Gary had heard via various people that I wanted to write, and so he randomly emailed me one day and asked me if I wanted to submit an idea, so I submitted 10, which he liked all of, but obviously I couldn't write the entire collection, so he'd only let me write one of them.
Terrible, isn't it? when that happens?
Seriously,
Yeah,
I had
yeah.
10 good stories there, but he only let me write
It's
one.
awful, isn't it? I mean, I don't know.
It's not
So,
good.
moving back to you now, I mean, obviously, right, the one thing writers do is they write, and that's all they do, because that's how they get things out of their brains onto the page and hopefully sell to other people. But that 2 years must have been a hell of a grind, waiting for something to happen in terms of the book, surely.
No, because I had a job, and I had other stuff going on, and it was just like, to hell with it. You know,
So you weren't still writing and doing other stuff at the same time?
The best thing I did was start another book and just completely forget about the first one. And when I got the offer, they said, well, by the way, have you written anything else? I said, yeah, actually, I've got another novel. Oh, can we see it? And then
It sort of went from there.
yeah.
Okay.
So I've my standard piece of advice is about the only good piece of advice I have for writers is when you finish something, just get over it emotionally and just get on with something else. Because I do meet quite a few people who are sort of trying to break into writing, and they've got their pet project. You know, it's a novel or a short story that they've been just working on for donkey's years, submitting it here, submitting it there, and you sort of feel, just get over it and
Move on
try
to
something
something
else.
else, yeah.
Maybe you'll sell it one day. I mean, Ian Banks, who we lost this year, he had, by the time he had his breakthrough with the Wasp Factory, he'd written loads of things, loads of trunk novels. You know, trunk novel is the novelist's term for the stuff you write before you get
Famous.
published. But he went back and he mined all that material, and he was able to actually get a lot of it subsequently into print in sort of altered form. So you know, it's by no means wasted work.
So the key here is keep everything you've ever written.
Well, I do,
Yeah.
or my wife does actually. If it was down to me, it would be shambolic. But my wife's methodical about keeping drafts.
OCD is a good thing.
Yeah. But I mean, to go back to what Andy was saying about the 10 ideas, you can never have too many ideas, can you?
No,
you know, because quite often you get, I get people email me and they say, "I've had a great idea. You write it, we'll split the profits." And it's like, that's hell. You know, I mean, the one thing about being a writer is you're generally not stuck for ideas, I find. I mean, ideas are 10 a penny. It's how you sort of organise it into a narrative. That's what they pay me for. That's the bit that I find hard work. But the ideas, you know, I mean, when I had the approach to do the Doctor Who book, it's like being given the keys to the sweet shop. It's like I can write a story anywhere in time and space.
Absolutely anything.
You know, it's like, what the hell do I do? It's like this might be my one shot at writing a Doctor Who book, and it's almost, you know, it's like rabbit in the headlights. You're just paralysed with possibility.
It's funny, isn't it, that Doctor Who does inspire that in people. It inspires people to go out and create. It inspires people to go out and write or act or direct. Other shows, like Star Trek, for instance, just inspire you to become scientists or doctors.
It's much more constrained, isn't it? I mean, something like Battlestar Galactica or Star Trek, you know, you don't have the narrative freedom that you have in Doctor Who. And in Doctor Who, you can literally do almost anything, I think. But, you know, you can't kill the Doctor. But
Well, you can, as long as by the end of it, yeah.
Stephen Moffat.
But yeah, it must be sort of quite a shock when someone comes to you and gives you that opportunity and just offers it. I mean, what happened? How did you get that job? I mean, how do they come to you and go, "Please, Mr. Reynolds, write this Doctor Who book"?
It was... I'm a lifelong fan of Doctor Who, from John Pertwee onwards, and I've always loved Doctor Who. I mean, it's a sort of a love-hate thing. You know, there are periods where I've really not liked the direction they're taking the show, but fundamentally I'm a Doctor Who fan, and I'm quite unashamed about it. And when they brought back the series, I said to my wife, I'd love to be involved with Doctor Who on some level, but I'm not going to go begging for it. You know, I'm just going to, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. Yeah. And it was like the best day of my life, because we were on holiday in Florida to go and see the space shuttle take off.
Really? Wow.
And we're sitting having a coffee in the morning before driving to Kennedy Space Centre, and I get a text or an email from my agent. It says, "Subject, Doctor Who." And I thought, that's interesting. Let's open this one. It's like, "Al, would you by any chance be at all interested in writing a Doctor Who novel?" And it was, you know, I was like, no, you know, I just couldn't believe it.
Tear their arm off with the socket.
But then, you know, I jumped at it, and it was explained that the BBC Books were trying to open up the universe again to other writers, and they wanted to bring in writers who had no prior connection to Doctor Who. And I think Moorcock had been, possibly had already written his book at that point, but he was mentioned as... yeah,
because that was Coming of the Terror Files,
yes,
wasn't it?
Yeah. And it would say, you know, you've got any of the Doctors. We wouldn't mind if you did an earlier one. And I said, well, that's fine, because I'd love to do John Pertwee and Joe Grant and the Master. Yeah. And the reply came back, you know, no one's gone for that one yet, so you're okay.
So you literally get to choose which Doctor is which, and then work out where you wanted to go in terms of the story.
It was easy for me, yeah.
Now, I've got to ask, right, I mean, everybody wants, for the 50th anniversary, the multi-Doctor story. They want the actual sort of all the bells and whistles to go along with it. Whether we get that or not is to be determined. But you did the multi-Master story in Harvests of Time. Now, come on, I mean, there must have been a certain level of, I just want to get them all in. I mean, how did you approach that? I mean,
right. So the way it worked was the BBC said we need a synopsis of you before you commit, before anything was inked.
Yeah.
We want to know what you want to write. So I rejected a few ideas, and then I came up with the story, essentially the story of the book, and it had a lot of stuff about the Time Lords in it, which I thought if it's a story featuring John Pertwee's Doctor and the Master, the Time Lords are quite an important element of that background, aren't they? Because it's the Time Lords have forced the Doctor to be on Earth. The Master is also a Time Lord. And the word came back and said, we want you to downplay the Time Lords because we want to downplay the mythos. And I thought, well, yeah, that's going to be really difficult now. How am I going to do this? And I basically decided, to hell with it, I'll just write the book.
And then present it as
Then
a fait
present
accompli.
it, exactly, and that's essentially what I did. I mean, the thing about, I was a bit cheeky because I came up with this idea that the Masters had hundreds of incarnations, potential incarnations, which is not really canonical.
But then again, he did pinch bodies left,
Yeah,
right,
I
and
mean, it
centre.
could happen,
Yeah.
I thought, but they were okay about it. I mean, I put in, I said I want to put in a visual reference to the John Sim
Yeah, I
Master.
noticed that.
It's just a
in there,
one-line joke, really, isn't it? But that's really the only overt link to the new Who, I think, in the whole book.
I like the way that you actually play with paradoxes. I mean, the whole basis of it is a paradox, actually, isn't it? I mean, something that happens within the book creates the actual past.
Yes, yeah.
But then those paradoxes are cut off, but there's still elements of the paradoxes.
Yeah.
survive. Is that something you thought about? Because it can give you a headache if you go into it too much. I suppose.
I did the synopsis, I started writing the book, but some of it didn't really occur to me till I was halfway through it. I thought, oh, hang on, if I, it's just, whenever I write stuff, there's always sort of ideas you have halfway through that you didn't have at the start. And I suppose, for me, writing is a way of exploring the narrative and finding little connections that maybe they're in there subconsciously or something like that.
Well, I like the fact that you play a lot with things from the 70s and you sort of shine a light on them in terms of the narrative and how they would work back then in comparison to what they were like today. Certainly computer links and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I cheated a bit on that because I had to have, if you know, the John Percy was 70 to
74.
Yeah, 70 to 74. So there weren't really personal computers as we know them around. I mean, my dad used to work as in Swansea County Council for the Highways Division, and they had a huge computer. It was like the computer, and it was punch cards and everything like that. But, and that was probably about 75 or 76. But there's this thing about, isn't it, that do the unit stories really happen in the early 70s, or are they set maybe a little bit in the future?
Fuzzy time.
Because there's like BBC Three in there. And there's an independent British space program, which I don't think we had in 1972.
No, we definitely had it there.
Like we've gone to Mars, haven't we? And,
Yes, of course. Well,
times.
everybody needs a hobby, let's face it.
yeah, that's right. So I thought, I can be a little bit flexible. Like in my mind, it sort of happens in the late 70s. But I at no point do I put a date on any of it. It's like a reference to sort of Double Diamond beer and...
It's just evocative of the period, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah.
I've got to ask, the actual concept behind the aliens is quite clever because it's not about overwhelming force, just overwhelming numbers.
Yeah, I mean, I can't...
I don't want to give too much away because it's genuinely a good book. I do recommend it, actually.
Well, I was thinking like because Doctor Who was made with budgetary constraints, isn't it? For most of it. I mean, not now because they can sort of do anything with CGI now.
Yeah.
But in the old days, you generally only ever saw 2 or 3 monsters. Like the Daleks only ever invaded with an invasion force of 3. And if they had to have more than 3 Daleks in the plot, they just go round and round, wouldn't they? Yeah. And it was the same with like the Ice Warriors, the Yeti, the Sontarans. You never saw more than 3. And I thought, well, it's understandable because they had a budget of 50p and a bag of crisps. They could afford a couple of costumes, and that was it. So I thought, well, the one thing you never saw was an overwhelming invasion force. And I thought, well, what if the aliens are actually a bit rubbish? Like individually, they're actually quite easy to destroy, but it's just sheer force of numbers. I thought, I don't think I've seen that done in Doctor Who, certainly not in that period. So I thought, and it's that thing that you've got from in my mind, my one chance at writing a Doctor Who book.
Now, is he a one chance? I mean,
I don't
is
know,
there any chance
but,
that
I mean, I'm sort of receptive to writing another one at some point because I enjoyed it a lot, but whether that opportunity would ever come up, I don't know. But I say, my initial idea was to use the Sontarans because they were my favourite monsters that had not been. I mean, the Daleks were out of bounds, the Cybermen were out of bounds.
So they literally told you that you're not allowed to touch any certain.
Well, because there's because they have the licensing.
Oh, of course, copyright.
Yeah, they have to go to the Terry Nation estate and blah blah blah. But it turns out the Sontarans are okay. You can use them, and the Master's okay. But then I thought, well, yeah, if this is my one shot at writing a Doctor Who book, do I want to use someone else's monsters, or do I want to try and come up with my own ones? And it was just that sort of decision, really.
So I was trying to create something proprietorial that actually might be used later.
Yeah.
That's
Well, no, I wasn't really thinking of it. I just thought, no, I'd like to just create a monster that's not, rather than reuse a stock one. And then they brought back the Sontarans in the new series there. So I thought, you know,
How long did it take you to write Harvest Time?
it took 4 months,
Really?
but it was going to be a month, which was just really stupid.
I could do that now.
Yeah, so I know a writer, Adam Roberts, who's a science fiction writer. He writes very, very literary, experimental science fiction novels, but he also writes parodies. He's done The Soddit,
Really?
The Cellamillion.
You,
know.
he's of course, yes.
Yeah,
A Roberts,
Yeah, yeah. And under all, and he did the Da Vinci Cod. Yeah. And I said to him, like, how long do these take? And he said they're really short. And he gave me a figure for how long it takes to write them. And I said, you can't be serious. You can't tell me you write those books in that short a span of time. And he said, yeah, but he said you don't have to think up the story. He says essentially you just take the existing plot of whatever you're parodying and just shove a load of jokes into it, which is easier than coming up with an original story. I thought, well, if you can write one of those in so many days, I could write a Doctor Who novel in 30 days because I'd do 3,000 words a day. That's 100,000 words, job done, bish bash bosh. It just doesn't work like that.
No.
You know? I got to a point in it where, like, there was the unit were doing something, and the brigadier was here, and Joe Grant was, and I couldn't work out how to move the story on. And it's just writing. You know, you just hit these plot walls that you can't break through, and you just have to.
Yeah, and then sometimes you just need to reorder the story.
I had to reorder the story and take a step back from it. You know, have a few cups of coffee.
I go, damn it, why won't it work? I can imagine. I'm the same as that. Yeah. Anyway, so in terms, you introduced a character. The rigs themselves are owned by McCrimmon, aren't they?
Yeah.
Now, was that a little sort of how can I put it? Homage to Jamie McCrimmon?
It was. It was that. I am not terribly familiar with the earlier Doctor Who, but Steve Baxter is a big fan of the Troughton era. His book had just arrived. I'd happened to watch the what's the one where they're in the different time zones?
War Games.
Jamie's
Such a fan.
goes on for a bit. Goes
10
on and on,
episodes.
doesn't it? Yeah. It's a
long.
struggle.
Oh, I quite like
Yeah.
it.
But I thought,
He likes all Doctor Who.
I know.
I think I'd come up, originally the name of the company was Moyland. And it was just at the last minute I thought, why not make him McCrimmon? And it was really just a sort of just cut and replace and a couple of lines of dialogue and it's done. Then my editor asked me to he said the Doctor would respond to that in some way, so either take it out or make a bit more of it.
Yeah.
And it was just on that level. It wasn't, I don't think it's not that serious. It's just a little joke,
it's
isn't it?
just a bit of a shout out, is it?
Yeah.
So there's no intention to make that sort of like the McCrimmon legacy, so to speak.
No, it's nothing.
Oh,
that
okay.
deep.
It is a
No,
shame.
no,
God, I was
no.
reading that thinking, what the,
Yeah. Well, I thought, it might clue the Doctor in that the protagonist, Eddie McCrimmon, who runs the oil rig, she's a good guy. You know, she's not a villain.
Yeah.
And that sort of the fact that she's distant descendant of Jamie would be
A bit of a clue to it.
clue to that, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah. But that's as deep as it gets.
Fair enough.